If your life was a movie, you could cut out the bad parts, the sadness, the pain, and the things you don't like. You could edit out the things that don't make sense, and your life would only be filled with meaningful events. You could choose the best image of a person, their ideal version, and hold on to that memory because that is how you want to remember them. But when your life is a movie, are you just playing a character, or are you a viewer watching things unfold in front of you and disconnected to everything happening in your own life? That is what Yuta, our protagonist, goes through in Goodbye Eri, which is a one-shot manga by Tatsuki Fujimoto. Yuta experienced some of the most important events in his life from behind his camera, and after facing some very painful things this way, he starts to see his own life as a movie and he is just someone watching it. When Yuta was a child, his mom was diagnosed with a disease, and at her request, he starts to film her every moment alive because she wants him to have all these videos of her to remember her by. She also wants him to film her death, but at the very last moment, he runs away from the hospital, so he never got to see his mom at her last breath nor film it. We find out all of this through a movie which Yuta made by editing all those videos he had captured of his mom. But at the very end of the movie, as he's running away from the hospital, the entire hospital explodes, which is a scene he added to give his movie a bombastic ending. So because of that terrible ending to his movie, everyone hates it and he decides to kill himself. He goes to a hospital roof to jump from where he meets Eri, who was the only person who loved his movie, and she convinces him to make another movie so good that everyone will be in shambles at the end. And that is the beginning of Goodbye Eri. The entire story is framed as a movie, from the paneling to the structure. So, Goodbye Eri is essentially a movie about Yuta's life and the making of his film with Eri. And as we see this process of him making the film, the layers are peeled back and we see Yuta's story and what makes him him. In the process of making their film, both of them start to watch movies regularly, and Eri forces Yuta to try and come up with a screenplay for his new movie. After failing to come up with an interesting story, he decides to make a movie about his own life, which picks up the story right after his movie had a terrible reception and he decided to kill himself. But right when he is about to do so, he meets a girl who turns out to be a 1,000-year-old vampire but is about to die from an illness, so she orders him to make a movie about her because she is afraid of being forgotten. And the movie would end when the protagonist films the death of the vampire girl and Eri was going to play the vampire. But during the filming process, Eri suddenly collapses and is rushed to the hospital, where we learn that Eri doesn't have long to live. And she wants Yuta to film her death because through that movie, some part of her would keep on living. Movies are stories where things happen for a purpose. Every scene contributes to the story it wants to tell, but life is messy. Sometimes ugly things can happen and there are no reshoots. In real life, once you miss a moment, you can't recreate it and have to live with the regret for the rest of your life. And one of Yuta's regrets is that he didn't get to shoot his mom's final moment. And after finding out that Eri is also dying in real life and not just in the movie, he decides he is going to shoot the final moments because he couldn't do it so for his mom. After being ridiculed for his first movie, with his second movie about Eri, he did exactly what he set out to do and left the audience in shambles and bawling their eyes out. His movie about his mom was how he wants to remember her. He wants to remember the best version of her, so in his movie she is a kind woman who wants her son to film her death because she wanted him to have all those videos of her to remember her by. And the movie he makes for Eri is also one which is meant to be something that will give people something to remember her by. Many imperfections that Eri had are not present in the movie, so because of that, her friends will remember her without her flaws. But of course, it is different in real life because it isn't easy to remove our flaws or our mistakes. Even if we choose to forget them, they are shaping our life and the lives of people around us. Yuta wants to remember his mom as someone perfect, but the abuse she put him through shaped him to become what he is. Yuta's biggest regret was him not being able to film the final moment of his mom, but his father had filmed it because it was her wish. And when he shows it to Yuta, we see another version of his mom, one who is unlike the perfect woman from Yuta's movie. The whole reason she wanted Yuta to film her was because she wanted to have a comeback story after she successfully beat her illness, but she didn't beat her illness, and asking her own son to film her slow death on top of having to lose his mom traumatized Yuta. After seeing her last moments where she calls him useless to the end brought closer to Yuta. Yes, she put him through a lot of abuse, but in the end, he has the power to choose how he wants to remember her. That was why he decided to film Eri's final moment, because his movie will give people a choice to remember her as she is in the film. The perfect version of Eri. But having to face the most traumatic event of his life by having to film the slow death of his mom and Eri, Yuta develops a coping mechanism of sorts and feels like an outsider watching his own life through a camera. Yuta feels like life is happening to him and there is nothing he can do about it beside play his part. And when difficult things happened, he felt disconnected to his own life. He started to see his own life as a movie and he is just someone watching it. He wasn't in control of his own life, but there was still one place where he felt like he was in control of his life, where he could still face the facts and difficulties of life as himself was in front of a camera. Because when the spotlights were on him, he could no longer hide behind his camera. But it was a long time until he stepped into the spotlight. After he showed his movie in the film festival, he is still not satisfied with his movie and he spends a lot of time re-editing the clips. But eventually moves on with his life. And just like in a movie, we don't see the uneventful parts of his life. All the boring bits are edited out until his entire family dies in a car accident and leaves him the sole survivor. It is after this tragic event he stands in front of his camera and looks back at his own life and how he felt like an outsider watching his own life play out in front of him. And after having lost everything in his life, he loses his will to live, so decides again to kill himself in a place which holds fond memory for him. So he goes to the hospital building where he used to watch movies with Eri and finds her there watching the movie he made for her. There she tells him that she really is a vampire who had lived a dozen lifetimes, but after every 200 years, her brain would be filled with memories and die. But as long as her heart survived, she could come back to life. And because she had this movie this time, she could remember what she was like. After this conversation with Eri, Yuta regains his will to live and also finds the answer to the question I posed at the beginning of this video. If your life is a movie, are you just playing a character or are you a viewer watching things unfold in front of you? And the answer is neither. You are not just a character or a viewer, you are the director. People who watch movies don't know what's been cut out, but the director is the one who cut out those parts. The movie will show the perfect version of events or people, but the one making the movie knows the mistakes and the imperfections. Yuta is then finally free of his own prison where he feels like someone who is an outsider in his own life, because he realizes that even if he may not be able to change the things that happened, and he can't just change what happened by remembering only the good parts of his life, because all the bad parts equally make him who he is, as do the good parts. He has the power to decide how he will react to the bad things that happens in his life, and it isn't by removing them from his memory but rather facing them and keep on living. He has the power to decide how his life will go because he is the maker of his own movie. Fujimoto's love for movies is very well known. From direct inspirations to references, we can see the influences of those movies in his own work, and by framing Goodbye Eri as a movie about a character who himself is making a movie about his own life, Fujimoto is able to create a very interesting yet somewhat confusing narrative. And the most amount of confusion comes from the ending of the story. The thing about the ending is that it is meant to be ambiguous so that people can derive their own interpretations of the story. I mean, this entire video is my interpretation of Goodbye Eri, and if you have a different one, please comment down below. Yuta's first movie about his mom ends with an explosion. After such an emotional story, the explosion comes out of nowhere and leaves you in a state of shock. Yuta's dad explains that Yuta always had a fantasy into everything he did, whether it was giving his dad a dragon's head in his picture or talking to giraffes at the zoo, which explains why in his next movie Eri plays a vampire. A pinch of fantasy can make things more interesting, especially in movies. Even after his movie about Eri garnered such a good reception at the film festival, he kept trying to re-edit the clips together because it was missing something. It was missing a pinch of fantasy that Yuta likes. So with that explosion at the end, he added that spice which he thought was missing from his movie. The entire story is a movie about Utah, and the realization he comes to at the end is that he himself is the filmmaker, so his movie can be what he wants. And he wants an explosion at the end. And to answer the question whether it is real or not,